The hallway echoed with laughter, sharp, careless, cruel. The floor was still wet, but they didn't care. Sneakers squeaked across the freshly mopped tiles, kicking muddy water back onto the once shining surface. "Watch it," Monkey made. One of the girls shouted as she accidentally spilled her coffee all over the edge of the mop bucket. The other kids burst out laughing. Sarah didn't say a word. She just bent down, wrung the mop again, and continued wiping the mess, her back aching, her knees burning from years of crouching, her hands cracked from chemical cleaners. The air smelled like bleach. Her eyes stung, but she blinked the tears away before they could fall. She never gave them the satisfaction. "Hey," a boy leaned in, barely whispering. "How much they pay you to be our janitor? Or is this charity for ugly old darkies?" More laughter. One of them recorded a video on their phone, zooming in as Sarah wiped beneath their shoes like some servant from a forgotten era. One girl even pantomimed tossing a banana. "Get it? Monkeys like bananas." She giggled. Sarah stood there, shoulders stiff, refusing to meet their eyes. Silence had always been her armor. They thought she was too scared to speak. But the truth was, if she ever started screaming, she wasn't sure she'd be able to stop. She finished cleaning the spill, nodded politely because that's what the world expected from a woman like her, and turned away as if the insults hadn't just scraped the last layer off her dignity. Behind her, a soda can flew and hit the wall. No teacher stopped them. No staff member looked her in the eye. And the camera kept rolling. Sarah walked to the supply closet, closed the door behind her, and finally let her knees buckle. She sat on the cold tile floor, back pressed to the metal shelves of brooms and old paint cans. Her hands trembled as she unclipped her name badge. Facility assistant, Sarah M. Carter. 30 years ago. That badge had said math teacher, Sarah M. Carter. She clutched it now like it still meant something, like it still carried the pride she once had. There was a time she wore pearls, pressed blouses, heels that clicked confidently down school hallways. She used to write formulas on chalkboards and inspire kids to believe in numbers, in logic, in themselves. But no one remembered that Sarah. Not after the scandal. Not after her ex-husband was caught embezzling, and the school needed someone to blame. Not after she lost her home, her car, and worst of all, her son. Child Protective Services claimed she couldn't provide a stable environment. Translation: you're black, broke, and alone. They took him just like that. She was never even allowed to say goodbye. That was 15 years ago. And now she was back in a school, only this time scrubbing its floors. She wiped her eyes, stood up, and put the badge back on. Out in the hallway, the kids had moved on. The mess was gone, but the sting remained. The echoes of their laughter clung to the walls like mildew. As Sarah stepped out with her mop, one of the younger students, Ethan, passed by. He didn't laugh. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, eyes searching for something. Sarah met his gaze for the briefest second, and something flickered. A memory? No, just her tired imagination playing tricks again. She sighed and pushed her mop forward, one square tile at a time, bleach and humiliation mixing in the air around her. They would forget her by tomorrow. They always did. But she would remember this day, because this was the day she almost broke, and something deep inside her whispered quiet but sharp like broken glass. One day, they'll know who you really are. The next morning, Sarah arrived before the sun. The halls were silent, lit only by the soft flicker of overhead lights, buzzing like tired fireflies. She unlocked the janitor's closet, pulled on her gloves, and began her routine wiping doorknobs, checking trash bins, mopping invisible dirt that no one cared to see. It was the only time she felt peace. Before the voices, before the stares, before the laughter, she passed the same bulletin board with honor roll photos, gleaming smiles of perfect students with perfect lives. And for a moment, she stared longer than she meant to. Years ago, her own son's photo might have hung there. She used to imagine it, a proud mother, front row at graduation, clapping with tears in her eyes. Instead, she only had silence. A photo from 10 years ago tucked deep in her wallet, creased at the edges. His name was Isaiah. Her Isaiah, taken at age 6, placed in foster care with strangers who promised updates and never sent one. Every call she made to social services was met with tight voices and colder hearts. You lost your custody due to instability, ma'am. There's nothing more we can do. No one ever asked if she was okay. No one cared why she had fallen. They just labeled her black, single, broken, a liability, a stain on their clean records. She walked past classroom 3B. Inside, a group of students rehearsed a debate about justice. The irony made her stomach twist. Justice is about fairness, a girl said confidently. It's about treating everyone equally. Sarah smiled bitterly. If only they knew. 15 years ago, she stood in front of a class just like that, one chalk in hand, fire in her voice, teaching kids about mathematical patterns and possibilities. She had been the first black woman to win the Regional Teaching Award for excellence in math education. But then, her husband had forged her signature on grant funds. When the truth came out, he vanished, and Sarah, she was the easy target. They didn't want scandal. They wanted silence, so they fired her quietly. Breach of trust, they said. No one listened when she said she didn't know. They didn't want explanations. They wanted someone to blame. And the school board had no problem blaming a black woman without a lawyer. She had gone from honored to invisible in a single week. By the end of that month, she had sold her rings, her laptop, even her grandmother's Bible just to buy groceries. She'd begged churches for help. She'd knocked on doors with resumes no one read. And when her landlord changed the locks, when CPS arrived unannounced, when Isaiah cried and clung to her legs as strangers pried him away, Sarah stopped fighting. The world had already decided what she was. Just another poor, black woman who couldn't keep her life together. Not someone worth saving. Not someone worth believing. That was the last day she saw her son. The last time she heard his voice was through a glass window, supervised by a social worker who told her not to cry too loudly because it might upset the child. He's adjusting, they said. Best not to confuse him with hope. Hope She had carried him for 9 months, sung to him, worked night shifts to afford formula, taught him to count on her fingers before he could speak. And now they told her not to give him hope. It was her only currency left. Back in the hallway, Sarah felt a sudden ache in her chest, not just from the mop handle pressing too tightly against her ribs, but from the flood of memory that refused to stay buried. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as a door opened behind her. "Miss Carter," a voice called softly. She turned. It was Ethan. The boy from yesterday, the one who hadn't laughed. The one who looked at her like she wasn't just a uniform. He held something in his hand. "You dropped this yesterday," he said, extending a small laminated card. Her badge. She must have dropped it when she'd collapsed in the closet. Sarah took it gently, fingers brushing his. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan didn't walk away. Instead, he lingered. "Why do they treat you like that?" he asked quietly. Sarah blinked. "Because I let them." He frowned. "But you don't deserve it." That stopped her. The words pierced deeper than he knew. She studied his face. His eyes held something familiar. A warmth, a question, a weight too heavy for someone his age. She almost asked, but no, it couldn't be. Isaiah would be older now, taller. Still, something tugged at her, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself in years. Not hope. Not yet. Just the memory of it. Ethan looked down and said something so soft she almost missed it. "My mom used to hum the same song you were humming yesterday. The one with no words, just a hum." Sarah's breath caught. She hadn't realized she'd hummed aloud. That lullaby. It was hers. Isaiah's. A melody they shared before bedtime. When the world outside their little apartment was cold, but their small living room was filled with warmth, she stared at Ethan. His eyes, his jawline, that little scar above his right brow. No. It couldn't be. Before she could say anything, Ethan turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner, leaving Sarah holding her badge, her breath shallow, and her past stirring like a storm she thought had passed. The hallway was quiet again, but inside her, something had started moving. Not rage, not grief, something else, something like recognition. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. She lay in her tiny rented room above the laundromat, staring at the cracked ceiling, her body still aching from scrubbing grout and gum off the cafeteria tiles. But it wasn't the pain that kept her awake. It was the scar, that tiny line above Ethan's right eyebrow. The same scar her son got at age 4 when he tripped chasing fireflies behind their old apartment. He had cried for hours. She remembered holding him against her chest, rocking him on the couch as he clutched a stuffed bear. "I'm never gonna play outside again," he had wailed. She laughed softly that night and said, "Baby, sometimes falling is how we learn to fly." Now, that same scar, that same brow, that same hum in his voice. No. It was impossible. Her son had been adopted by another family placed in a different state. She was told to forget, to move on. Sealed records, they said, for the child's best interest. But that scar, that hum, what were the odds? The next day, Sarah found herself sweeping the courtyard when Ethan appeared again alone this time, standing by the fountain, pretending to read a book. He wasn't reading. He was glancing at her every few seconds. She tried to ignore it, but then he spoke. "That lullaby," he said without looking up. "Did you make it up?" Sarah froze. She placed both hands on the broom handle, knuckles white. "Yes," she said slowly, "a long time ago. My real mom used to hum it to," he whispered. Her heart skipped. He looked at her, eyes suddenly glassy. "I don't remember her face. I was too young when I left. But sometimes I hear the tune in my dreams." She didn't breathe. "I asked my adoptive parents about it once," Ethan continued. "They said it was nothing, just a baby song. But I never heard anyone else hum it until you." Silence stretched between them. The broom slipped from Sarah's hand, falling to the ground with a soft clatter. Ethan bent down and picked it up for her. As he handed it back, their fingers touched again. "Where did you grow up?" she asked, her voice barely more than air. "Newark. Foster care first. Then a couple took me in. Good people, strict. They don't talk much about the past." Sarah's throat tightened. "Do you know your birth name?" He paused. "No, just Ethan. My parents gave it to me." Her vision blurred. She tried to hide it. Ethan stepped closer. "You feel familiar," he said gently. "Like, I don't know, like I'm supposed to know you." Sarah tried to smile, but failed. Her lips trembled instead. "Maybe I remind you of someone," she said, turning away. "I think I remind you of someone," Ethan replied. That stopped her. She turned back, eyes searching his. The scar, the gaze, that feeling in her chest she hadn't felt since he was taken. "I used to have a stuffed bear," he said suddenly. "Brown, one eye missing. I called him Rocket." Sarah gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. Rocket. That bear had been his favorite. He wouldn't sleep without it. She had stitched the missing eye 3 times before giving up and calling it Rocket's pirate patch. No one else could have known that. Tears filled her eyes. She couldn't hold them back this time. Ethan stepped forward slowly. "Are you?" He didn't finish the question. She couldn't answer. Her knees buckled. He caught her before she fell. There, in the middle of the empty courtyard, a boy held a woman who once sang him to sleep. A woman who had searched for him in every face, every crowd, every memory. She clung to him like air, like prayer, like the years had never passed. And for the first time in over a decade, she allowed herself to hope. Not fully, not yet, but enough to whisper the truth. Your name, before they took you, was Isaiah. The news traveled faster than whispers in a chapel. The school was buzzing. Not because of Sarah. Of course not yet, but because the CEO of Bright Star Foundation, one of the largest education donors in the state, was coming for a surprise visit. The announcement came during morning assembly. "He'll be here Friday," the principal said, puffing her chest like she had summoned a god. "And he's not coming alone. He's awarding a $5 million grant to one of our top-performing programs." The room erupted in applause. Teachers scrambled to polish their lesson plans. Students were warned to behave. The school ordered new banners, fresh flowers for the stage, and even rented a red carpet because when wealth shows up, so does the show. Sarah heard it all from the supply closet, folding trash bags and trying to ignore the storm of activity outside. She had learned long ago that people only noticed her when she was in their way. But something about this visit unsettled her, because Ethan was nervous. The day before the CEO was set to arrive, he found her by the stairwell where he knew she cleaned every afternoon and stood silently for a long time. "You okay?" she asked, unsure whether to call him Ethan or Isaiah. "I'm fine," he said, eyes darting. "It's just, he's coming." Who? The man who changed everything for me. The man who helped me get out of foster care and into a real home. He paid for my school, got me counseling, gave me hope. Sarah nodded slowly. "That's a rare gift." Ethan looked up at her, and his voice dropped. "I think he knew you." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I told him about you. The song, the badge, the mop closet." He didn't say anything at first, but then he smiled like he already knew, and he said, "Sometimes life brings us full circle." "Be ready." Sarah's heart thundered. She wanted to ask more, but Ethan stepped away. "I have to go," he said. "Just be there tomorrow, okay? Just watch." He didn't wait for an answer. The next day, the school sparkled. The gymnasium had been transformed. Balloons, banners, students in pressed uniforms, seated in neat rows. A stage stood at the front, flowers flanking the podium, cameras waiting to capture the perfect PR moment. Sarah wasn't invited. Of course not. But she came anyway, standing quietly at the back, behind the last row of chairs, next to the janitor's closet where the bleach smell never quite faded. She wore her cleanest uniform and stood as straight as her back would allow. The principal took the stage. Today, she beamed. "We welcome a man whose generosity has touched thousands of lives. A man of vision, compassion, and excellence, please. Welcome Mr. Benjamin Carter, CEO of Bright Star." Applause thundered. Sarah didn't hear the name at first. Not until the man walked on stage. Tall, confident, charismatic. A broad smile that lit up the room. But to Sarah, the name hit like a bolt of lightning. Carter. The same surname she gave up when she lost custody. The same name her son should have carried. Her vision blurred. Benjamin Carter approached the microphone, but instead of looking at the audience, his eyes scanned the back of the room and stopped on her. He smiled, not politely, but deeply, with recognition. Then, without reading the prepared speech, he spoke. "I was asked to come today to honor academic excellence," he began, "to reward top performers and inspire the next generation. But before I do that, I want to introduce you to someone far more important than I am." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Benjamin stepped down from the stage, microphone still in hand, walking past rows of stunned faculty, confused students, and a principal who was now visibly sweating. He stopped at the back, in front of Sarah. Silence fell over the room. He turned to face the crowd and raised his voice. "This woman," he said, gesturing beside him, is the reason I am who I am today. Double quotes gasps. Double quotes this woman. He repeated, believed in me when I was a hungry, hopeless kid with nothing but a beat-up calculator and a stutter. He turned to her. She taught me how to believe, not just in numbers but in myself. Sarah's lips trembled. Benjamin looked at the audience again. She was my math teacher, my mentor, my only safe place in a world that constantly told me I didn't belong. Then, louder, firmer, in front of hundreds of students and teachers who had mocked, ignored, and dismissed her for years, he said, "This woman is my mother." The gym fell into stunned silence. One phone dropped to the floor. A girl gasped. A boy whispered, "Wait!" "What?" Sarah stood frozen. Benjamin turned to her and pulled her into a hug. Tight. Fierce. Not polite but desperate, like a son hugging. The past he finally found. Applause erupted not all at once, but in waves, confused, staggered. Then real. Some teachers wiped tears. Some students stared, ashamed. The principal clapped too slowly, awkwardly as if trying to salvage her moment. But the moment was never hers. It was Sarah's. Benjamin pulled back, looked her in the eyes, and whispered, "They'll never overlook you again." After the clapping died down, the silence felt heavier than ever. Everyone stood frozen, staring at Sarah like they were seeing her for the first time. Not the janitor, not the invisible woman in the hallway, but someone who mattered, and that terrified them. The principal approached quickly, her smile stretched to tight, to fake. "Miss Carter," she stammered, we had no idea. If we had known." Sarah looked at her. For the first time in years, she really looked at her. The principal had once voted to reject Sarah's application. When she asked to volunteer in the library years ago, unfit, she had written, unqualified. Now, that same woman reached for Sarah's hand like it was some kind of photo op. Sarah didn't move. Benjamin stepped between them. "No need," he said coldly. "She's already done more for this school than you ever will." The principal flushed. "Well, of course. I mean, we appreciate all her efforts." "Her efforts?" Benjamin said, raising an eyebrow. "You mean scrubbing the floors while your students threw trash at her? While your staff watched and said nothing?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few teachers lowered their eyes. Others looked away entirely. Sarah didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The weight of their silence was enough. Benjamin turned to the students, now his voice sharper, eyes scanning the rows. "I know some of you," he said. "I've seen your videos, your comments, your laughter." The girl who had mocked Sarah with the banana pantomime stared down at her shoes, cheeks burning. "I was one of you once," Benjamin said. "Poor, hungry, angry. But I had someone who saw past my skin, my clothes, my fear." He pointed to Sarah. "She gave me more than an education. She gave me dignity." Then he paused. "And you mocked her for cleaning your mess." The room went still. Ethan stood up slowly from the third row. Everyone turned. He walked toward the front, face unreadable, and then right there on the stage he hugged Sarah. Tight, silent, like he was reclaiming something he never knew he had lost. The students whispered again, "Is that her son too?" "No way. I thought he was adopted. What's happening?" The truth moved through the room like a wave. The boy who never mocked. The boy who looked like he belonged to them, but didn't. Because he belonged to her, a few students began to shift. Awkward, guilty, and then unexpectedly the girl with the coffee cup, the one who had laughed the loudest days ago, stood up and walked to the microphone. She looked scared, but she looked honest. "I want to apologize," she said, "to Ms. Carter, for how I treated you." She looked at Sarah, and her voice cracked. "I didn't see you. I mean I did, but I didn't care. I followed what everyone else was doing." Sarah stared at her, then nodded, not to forgive, but to acknowledge, not to witness, because apologies are only the beginning. Behind her, two more students stood up, then 3, then 5. By the end of the hour, a line had formed teenagers, eyes full of shame, waiting to say words they should have spoken long ago. Benjamin watched them, arms crossed. "Dignity," he said quietly. "It's not something you get when you succeed. It's something you give when no one else will." Sarah turned away. Her legs felt weak, not from exhaustion this time, but from the weight of justice slowly, finally, tipping back in her favor. In the hallway afterward, the teachers gave her space. The staff who once pretended not to see her now looked her in the eye and struggled to find words. Only one dared to speak. It was the young assistant teacher, who had once watched a student pour soda on the floor Sarah had just mopped and said nothing. She walked up slowly, holding a small bouquet of flowers. "They're not enough," she said, "but they're real." Sarah took them. She didn't smile, but she didn't walk away either. And that, somehow, felt like the first step toward healing. The next morning, the news had already broken. Every local station, every online blog, every social media platform flooded with the same headline. Janitor revealed as CEO's long-lost mentor. School stunned by emotional reunion. There she was on the front page, a photo of Sarah in her janitor uniform, standing beside Benjamin Carter, the multimillionaire CEO, hugging her like a son. For decades, she had been invisible. Now, the world couldn't stop looking. Sarah sat in the break room, still the same cracked linoleum floors, same humming vending machine, same stale smell of instant coffee. But this morning, everything felt different. Staff who had once ignored her now passed by, awkwardly pausing, unsure how to greet her. "Ms. Carter," one said softly, "You're trending." She nodded politely, though she had no idea what that meant. Ethan burst into the room holding his phone. "You're on the news." He placed it in her hands. The screen showed a video. Benjamin, on stage, calling her "my mother." The comments poured in faster than she could read. "This broke me. We don't deserve people like her. Find her, protect her, celebrate her. This is the definition of grace. Who is this woman? We need a statue of her." Sarah's hands trembled. She had lived her life shrinking herself to survive. Now, people were calling her name, with reverence. Not "Hey, janitor," not "Lady, clean this," but "Ms. Carter," mentor, mother. The school board called that afternoon, not to fire her, not to reprimand, but to ask nervously if she'd be willing to speak at next month's educational conference. "We'd love to highlight your story," the director said, his voice carefully neutral. Sarah took a long breath. "You mean the story you never asked about?" She replied. Silence. Then, "Yes, that one." She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. That weekend, Bright Star Foundation announced the creation of a new annual award, the Sarah M. Carter Educator's Honor, for teachers who changed lives in silence. $100,000 prize. Her name carved into the plaque. For the first time in her life, Sarah had nothing to mop. Instead, she stood at the unveiling ceremony in a simple navy blue dress, a borrowed one, ironed to perfection. Beside her, Benjamin Carter smiled proudly. He had told her, "We'll start with this, but the world needs more." Reporters crowded in. Flashes blinding. Someone asked, "Ms. Carter, how does it feel to be seen?" She paused, then answered softly, "I've always been here. You're just now looking." The crowd went quiet. One reporter, eyes wet, whispered, "Thank you." Later that evening, Ethan sat beside her on a park bench near the school. The sunset painted the sky orange and purple. He handed her a folded piece of paper. She opened it. It was a drawing, childlike, done in crayon but unmistakable. A woman with brown skin, a little boy, a bear named Rocket between them. Above, written in shaky cursive, "Me and Mom." Her hands covered her mouth. Tears fell this time without shame. "I remember now," Ethan said quietly. "Not everything, but enough." She reached for his hand and held it. "My Isaiah," she whispered. "You came back." He leaned his head on her shoulder. And for the first time in 15 years, Sarah didn't feel broken. She didn't feel forgotten. She felt whole, because the world finally saw her. But more importantly, her son did. The lights were too bright. Sarah stood behind the podium, staring into the crowd of polished educators, glossy-haired administrators, and news cameras blinking red in quiet anticipation. The auditorium was packed. People came not for some celebrity, not for some keynote professor. But for her, Sarah M. Carter, former janitor, former teacher, forever mother. She had rehearsed her speech a dozen times. Benjamin had even offered a ghostwriter. She refused, because this moment wasn't about polished words. It was about truth. She took a slow breath, her fingers trembling slightly on the edge of the lectern. Then she began. "My name is Sarah Carter. You may have seen me on your screens this past week. You may have shared my story, reposted the video, shed a tear, clapped in your living rooms. And I thank you." Her voice was calm, steady. "But I need you to know, I wasn't just a story. I was a woman who was erased. Silence. I was a teacher once. The first black woman to win the state's Excellence in Mathematics award. I had a son. I had a home. I had a future." She paused. "And then, I didn't." Her gaze swept the front row. Benjamin, Ethan, principals, board members. Because of one man's crime, I was branded a liability. My skin made it easy. My silence made it permanent. I was fired without due process. I lost my home. I lost my child. A hush fell over the room. You think the worst part was losing my job? It wasn't. It was standing in a courtroom as a social worker told me with a straight face that I was culturally unfit to raise a boy in today's society. She swallowed hard. That phrase lived in my bones for years. A few gasps. In the audience, someone near the back dabbed their eyes. I spent the next decade cleaning the floors of institutions that once praised me. I heard the word dirty more times than I heard my own name. Her voice didn't crack. She was done crying. I was mocked by students, ignored by faculty, and every time I wanted to scream, I reminded myself my son might walk these halls one day, and I wanted the world he stepped into to be just a little bit cleaner. Benjamin wiped a tear from his cheek. Ethan's shoulders shook silently beside him. I didn't speak then, because I thought if I stayed quiet, I'd survive. She looked out at the crowd. But survival is not the same as living. There was a beat. Then her voice softened. And yet, here I am, because someone saw me. A boy I once taught saw me. Again, not as a cleaner, not as a statistic, but as a mother. And then my son, Isaiah, found his way back to me. The room exhaled collectively. Sarah's hands no longer trembled. I am not asking for pity. I'm asking for memory. Don't forget the invisible ones. Don't forget the janitor in your school, the cafeteria worker you've never thanked, the teacher who doesn't smile anymore. She leaned forward. And don't wait until they go viral to treat them like human beings. Silence. Heavy. Holy dot. Then she smiled gently, genuinely. I never stopped teaching. I just changed classrooms. The room erupted. A standing ovation. Tears. Cheers. Applause so loud it shook the stage floor. But Sarah stood still. Not for attention, but because, finally, she didn't need to chase dignity. She was standing in it. 2 days after the conference, Sarah was sorting through a stack of mail at the small wooden table in her rented room. Most of it was predictable bills, congratulations cards from strangers who had seen her speech, even invitations to interviews. She wasn't sure she wanted to give. Then she saw it, a plain envelope. No return address. Her hands trembled slightly as she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. She recognized the handwriting immediately. It had been years, but she could never forget it. Her ex-husband. The man whose crime had set the entire chain of events in motion. The man who vanished when the authorities came knocking. The man who never once reached out as her life crumbled. Sarah's breath caught. She unfolded the letter. Sarah, I saw you on the news. I didn't think you'd even open this, but I had to try. I'm sorry. Those words feel cheap after everything I cost you. You lost your job. You lost your home. You lost Isaiah. Because of me. You told me not to get involved with that scheme. I didn't listen. And when it all came down, I ran. Because I was a coward. I told myself you'd be better off without me. That you were strong enough to rebuild. But the truth is, I couldn't face you. Seeing you on that stage, Hearing your speech, you're stronger than I ever deserved. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know the truth. You never failed, Sarah. I did. David Sarah set the letter down and stared at the wall. 1,000 emotions surged: anger, sorrow, disbelief, a strange ache she didn't know how to name. He was still out there, the man who had disappeared and left her to bear the weight of a crime she didn't commit. And now, this, a hollow apology in an envelope. She felt Ethan's presence before he even stepped into the room. He had been living with Benjamin now, but he visited her every day, never letting more than a few hours pass without checking in. "What's that?" he asked gently. Sarah hesitated, then handed him the letter. He read it slowly, jaw tightening at every line. When he finished, he looked up. "Do you want me to find him?" he asked, voice low. "I can. Benjamin could too. We could make him pay." Sarah's hands tightened in her lap. For 15 years, she had imagined this moment, standing in front of David, screaming, asking why he didn't come back for her, for Isaiah, demanding justice. But now, she wasn't sure what justice meant. "I don't know," she admitted softly. "I don't even know if I want to see his face again." Ethan sat down across from her. "He's not the reason we're here," he said. "You are." Sarah blinked. "You kept going. You never stopped. You're the reason I found you again." She reached for his hand, and he let her. "I don't care what happens to him," Ethan whispered. "As long as I don't lose you again." Sarah's throat tightened. She placed the letter back in the envelope, slid it into a drawer, and closed it. "Then we move forward," she said quietly. "We don't let the past write the rest of the story." Ethan squeezed her hand, and for the first time, the weight of David's betrayal felt lighter. Because the man who had broken her family was no longer the one who defined it. That night, Sarah sat by the window as the city lights blinked outside. She thought about the girl who used to dream of standing in front of a classroom forever. She thought about the woman who had mopped floors in silence, ignored and humiliated. She thought about the mother who had searched for her son in every face for 15 long years. And she realized something. She had survived them all. And now, for the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. The morning sun spilled through the kitchen window, casting warm gold across the table where Sarah sat, sipping her tea in silence. The past few days had moved like a dream, soft, surreal, almost weightless. She no longer walked through life ducking her head, no longer felt like a shadow against the walls of the world. She had a name now, a voice, a story people wanted to hear. And yet, she still woke early, still folded napkins the way she used to, fold cafeteria paper towels, still swept the front step of the apartment complex out of habit. Even though no one asked her to, some routines were stitched too deep to unlearn. That's when the call came. Benjamin's name lit up the screen. She answered, expecting a quiet hello. Instead, he sounded like a man brimming with excitement. "Are you sitting down?" he asked. "I'm always sitting down," she smiled. "Well, not for long." He laughed, then paused. "You're going to want to stand for this." He told her everything. The State Board of Education had watched her speech twice. Then again. Then again. It had gone viral not just online, but inside institutions, superintendents, foundations, lawmakers, and they didn't just want to honor her. They wanted her to teach again, but not as a substitute, not as a side note speaker. They wanted her to lead a new program, one designed to train future educators in empathy, diversity, and real-world resilience. They wanted Sarah Carter, a woman once erased, to become the director of a brand new Institute for Human-Centered Teaching, backed by Bright Star Foundation and the state. It would bear her name. She didn't speak for a long time. Sarah, Benjamin asked, voice softer. Are you still there? I am, she said. I'm just trying to believe this is real. It's more than real, he said. It's overdue, she whispered. They want me to teach the teachers. They want you to rebuild the system, he said. Because you lived everything they never dared to ask about. A tear rolled down her cheek. She had begged once on her knees, outside a school board office for a job shelving books. Now, she was being handed the keys to rewrite how education saw its people. And still, doubt crept in. I've been out of the classroom so long, she said quietly. Benjamin replied. You've never left it. You just changed the walls. 1 month later, the ribbon-cutting ceremony took place in a building with wide glass windows and no corner offices. By Sarah's request, she stood beside a new sign. The Carter Institute for Compassionate Teaching, where dignity begins. At the door, journalists asked the usual questions. What does this moment mean to you? What will your first class teach? What would you say to the version of yourself from 15 years ago? She answered them all, but the one that lingered most came from a young black girl in the back of the crowd. No microphone, no credentials, just a notebook in her lap. She raised her hand. When did you know you were enough? She asked softly. The crowd went still. Sarah stepped away from the cameras, walked down into the audience, and crouched beside the girl. I didn't, she said. Not at first. The girl looked confused. I waited for the world to tell me, Sarah continued. Waited too long. And when it didn't, I thought it meant I wasn't. She took the girl's hand. But then I realized the world was never going to tell me. I had to say it first, out loud, even if no one listened. Especially when no one listened. The girl blinked hard. Sarah smiled. And the moment I did, everything changed. That evening, as the sun set behind the Carter Institute, Sarah sat alone in the empty building, walking through the future in her mind. Desks not yet filled, names not yet learned, but possibilities already breathing in the walls. Ethan called. How was the first day? She laughed. No students yet. Doesn't matter. They'll come. You've always been teaching something even when no one was watching. She looked around. The janitor, the teacher, the mother, the story no one wanted. All of them had brought her here, and she was ready. The first day of class arrived like a quiet sunrise, unassuming, but full of promise. Sarah stood at the entrance of the Carter Institute, dressed in a soft gray blazer and flats. No pearls, no podium, no script, just her, a notebook, and the belief that every student walking through these doors would be more than a test score. The lobby filled slowly. Future educators, counselors, social workers, people of all ages, races, and accents. They had come not just to be taught, but to learn how to see. Sarah greeted them one by one, calling each by name as they entered. No one was invisible here. No one was just anything. At 9 o'clock sharp, she walked into the main room. No desks, only a circle of chairs. She believed learning happened best when everyone could look each other in the eye. She stood in the center. Everyone fell silent. "My name is Sarah Carter," she began. But most people only started using it a few months ago. Soft laughter rippled. She continued, "I've been a teacher. I've been a janitor. I've been ignored, insulted, pitied, and applauded." She looked around the room. "But through it all, I was always watching, listening, learning." She paused, then added, "Today, we begin not with a textbook, but with a question." She wrote it on the whiteboard. "Who have you overlooked?" A hush fell over the class. No one spoke then. Someone did. A young man raised his hand. He stood up slowly, and Sarah recognized him immediately. It was James, the boy who had once poured soda onto her freshly mopped floor. The one who had laughed, filmed her, and walked away without guilt. He was older now, taller, his voice steadier, but his eyes held weight. "I came here because I needed to face what I did," he said. "I was 16. I thought I was funny. I never once thought about how it felt for you." He paused. "I see you now." Sarah didn't look away. "Why now?" she asked gently. "Because you taught me something," he replied. "Not when you were scrubbing floors, but when you stood on that stage and didn't scream." His voice cracked. "You had every right to hate us, but instead, you taught." He sat down. And for a moment, the room held its breath. Sarah smiled, not to dismiss the past, but to release its grip. She looked around. "You don't have to come here perfect," she said. "You just have to come here ready to confront, to unlearn, to rebuild." More students stood. One by one, they shared stories of silent cruelty, of missed moments, of wanting to do better. By the end of the first hour, the board on the wall was filled with confessions and questions. But none of it was shameful. It was honest. And that made it sacred. Later that evening, Sarah walked the empty halls of the Institute alone. Sunlight faded through the glass windows, casting long shadows that didn't scare her anymore. In the courtyard, she saw Ethan and Benjamin sitting on a bench, waiting. Ethan held a folder inside, the first draft of his application to become a teacher. Benjamin had donated another wing to the school. They weren't just watching her anymore. They were following her. She joined them, and for a long time, they sat in silence. Finally, Ethan asked, "Do you think people really change?" Sarah looked up at the sky. "I think people remember," she said, "and that's where change begins." He nodded. And just then, a group of students walked by, a mix of skin tones, accents, hair textures, laughing, backpacks slung over one shoulder. One of them turned and waved. "Good night, Ms. Carter." She waved back. Not just a name, not just a face, but a legacy. Because once they mocked her for her skin. Now they listened for her voice. And as the stars blinked awake above her, Sarah Carter smiled. She wasn't a janitor. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't forgotten. She was the beginning of something better.